Great. Well, welcome everyone. Today we have an amazing panel for you, which is the session on sectors where Latinx will be driving our innovation. My name is Carolina Huaranca. I'm currently a scout at Lightspeed Venture Partners. And our panel today is going to focus on some current trends that we see in the Latinx community and tech and in other sectors. So what I'm going to do next is turn it over to our esteemed panelists. I'll first be starting with Sergio, and what I'd like you to do is just tell me the name, your full name, the company you're with, and what you're working on.
Thank you, Carolina, and nice to meet everybody. My name is Sergio Monsalve, and I am originally actually from Mexico. I came here when I was in high school, and have been here since, mainly in California. I spent some time on the East Coast. Most recently, in the last 13 years, I've been an investor and a partner at Northwest Venture Partners. And I am, so the last 5-6 years, I've been very much focused on a theme that I'm looking to pursue actually beyond Northwest on my own, and as a venture capital investor in earlier stages, Series A or seed investments in what I call the future of work and future of learning. And that is essentially the theme that I'm most excited about, and where I think there's going to be a lot of innovation that Latinx founders could create. And so I can talk a little bit more about that as the panel goes on. But that's a very exciting panel. Obviously, a very exciting theme, and obviously the pandemic has created, and I would say, created a new normal around that theme that I'll be happy to expand on.
Great. Well, I'm excited to be asking and double clicking on that particular theme. So next I want to move us over to Cecilia.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Corral. I'm the co-founder and VP of product at CareMessage. CareMessage is a patient engagement platform for underserved populations. We are the largest in the US. We work with about 7 million underserved patients, mainly low income, uninsured, underinsured, that are served at free clinics and community health centers. And we've been very busy this year with the pandemic. Our clinics have been hit pretty hard, and their patients as well, in terms of distributing COVID-related information. And now we're moving on more into helping them manage everything that's coming, and then all the repercussions from the pandemic. So excited to get a chance to chat today about my experience as a founder, and also I regularly collect data on Latina founders. So I do have some good insights on what's happening with our Latina founders in the tech sector.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I was going to mention that I believe it's, how big is the list that you last put out on Medium? Was it like 200 Latina founders that have
Yes, the last one I published was 100, but I do have one that I'm still trying to work through, and I find more every day, which is a good problem to have, but it's over 200 now.
That's incredible. And we continue to see our community grow and thrive. So hopefully after this, people who are listening will send you on more names. So I want to move over to Ruben. We actually haven't had a pleasure to meet, but I think I know all the panelists but Ruben. So can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your company and what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Ruben Flores. I'm originally from Guadalajara, Jalisco. I was born and raised there. My family moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin when I was 13. And I am the founder of CashDrop. So CashDrop is a mobile native commerce platform. It enables people to create an online store in under 15 minutes, no commissions, no monthly fees. So we really want to empower entrepreneurs anywhere to turn their ideas and dreams into money. That's our goal. And super exciting. We're less than a year old. Stuff has been moving really quickly. So we're, really excited about what's going, but really the impact that we get to see in a lot of these entrepreneurs that previously hadn't really been able to really digitize their ideas and their businesses. And that's really what gets us moving. So very, very excited to have this discussion here today.
Awesome. Well, I know I want to turn my ideas and dreams into money. So we will be talking later. And last but not least, Mark, I'd love you to share a little bit more about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Mark Madrid here at Carolina. Thank you. And one of my favorite conferences of the year. So I'm glad you persisted, you pivoted yourself in terms of having this virtual format. We'll be back there in Las Vegas, and let's all pray for that. That'd be a good day to imagine. But I have the highest honor imaginable to serve Latina and Latino entrepreneurs across 50 states in Puerto Rico. That is our purpose. That is our core pillar. That is our existence. It's both professionally purposeful and it's personal. And so I'm the CEO of the Latino Business Action Network, LBAN, and we collaborate with Stanford University to champion the unicorn. It's the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. And through this collaboration, we just have 3 priorities, but they are so critical. One is to fund the most comprehensive research in the country on US Latino and Latina entrepreneurs. Secondly, because only 3% of our ecosystem of Latinx entrepreneurs are scaled, and we define that as over $1 million in annual gross revenues. Only 3% achieve that threshold. We recruit these top 3%ers to a scaling program at Stanford called the Stanford Latino Scaling Program. It has an official name called the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative Education Scaling Program. But over the last 5 years, we've graduated 653. Super majority, I would say over 88% are scaled, so over $1 million of annual gross revenues. And combined annual gross revenues for this group is north of $3.3 billion. And so they come from 31 states and Puerto Rico. And by 2050, we would like our BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious goal is to have 5,000 graduates by 2050 with projected annual gross revenues is an annual figure of north of 50 billion, employing over 1 million across 50 states in Puerto Rico. This is a difficult time. It's a challenging time for our entrepreneurs. This pandemic is disproportionately affecting us more than anyone else. I should know it hit square at my home. My dad passed away from COVID-19. I almost lost my mother, and my sister was positive. I'm in Northern California, they're in Texas. It's been a nightmare of the last 2 months. But what I do carry is my dad's resilience and tenacity, because he was a self-made entrepreneur. I know he's an entrepreneur in heaven too, but we have that entrepreneurial DNA. So we have that work ethic, and now it's time to leverage technology so that we can play chess and not checkers. That will create the kind of momentum that we all want for this, because it's an American economic imperative.
Completely, I agree with you. And thank you for being so authentic. You know, our community has been disproportionately impacted with this pandemic. I include myself. My dad was in the hospital. My condolences to you, Mark, and thank you for being here. I think all of us kind of share that similar thread. But if there is a time for us to activate and mobilize our community, it is now. We are here and we stand strong. So that's part of this activation of building this movement behind LTX Fest. The point of this conversation is really to talk about the opportunities that even exist in this crazy pandemic. So I want to go before the pandemic. What were people thinking just in terms of sectors that they were excited about from an investment standpoint, but also because a lot of you here are founders, and some of you, like Mark, have tons of research behind this. So I want to start with that question. Pre-pandemic, what sectors do you think the community that yourselves were particularly excited about? So because I'm talking about COVID, I'm going to go to Cecilia first to start with that.
Yeah, I think pre-pandemic, and I know we're going to talk about the pandemic as well, but I obviously work in healthcare. So I think healthcare is definitely an area where I think there's just been, not just because of COVID, but a lot of historical inequities in healthcare disparities for our community that I think are critical for somebody from within our community to solve these problems. But I think we see the same in a lot of other sectors. I'm really excited about a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the legal tech space as well. I think immigration is a really big issue, and figuring out ways that we can support our community, our undocumented community, especially in accessing resources, I think is really critical, and even more critical now than it had been before. Financial inclusion, I think, is another really important space. So those 3 to me are sectors that really have stood out historically as areas where I think the Latinx community has been marginalized, but I think that's where the opportunities come from for us as Latinx founders to step in and help the industry think about these problems in a different way based on our experiences.
Got it. And I want to move over to Sergio next. I personally have a passion for education and learning. And if anything, you've been investing in this space pre-pandemic. So Sergio, pre-pandemic, what were you looking at Norwest and what were you excited about?
Yeah, I think the pre-pandemic, I think it's going to look it looked to me like there was a lot of inequity around education. There was plenty of data to show that Latinos specifically were not necessarily reaping all the benefits of the educational institutions. So I do think there are pre-pandemic and even more so post-pandemic, which I know we'll talk about. I think there's a really important thing we can do as venture capitalists and entrepreneurs to help bridge the gap, the educational divide, using technology. That's one theme that's obviously spans across anything from early childhood education, K through 12, higher ed, as well as the new emerging trend, which is to educate yourself and throughout your life. And so lifelong learning is something that I've been very passionate about. So you shouldn't have to get your diploma when you're 21, get your bachelor's degree, and then never come back to school. I think the new trend is that you will continuously be learning. And that's why I think I was most excited about the investment I made in Udemy about 5 years ago. Now Udemy is a large marketplace for education in San Francisco. And so I think the future of learning was something I spent a ton of time on, as well as the future of work, which is worker productivity tools, anything that computing can do to make you into a better person is essentially the theme I was pursuing. I continue to pursue. So, and that as a better person, I mean a productive, happy person. So that's why I think it relates around what type of work we can do by leveraging technology. We can do better, right? So that's where I am.
Got it. And I'd love to hear your perspective, Mark, because you also see this from a research standpoint, massive ecosystem. Pre-pandemic, what were you seeing?
Pre-pandemic, there's a distinction that our research reinforces between non-scaled and scaled firms. And we define that scale as over $1 million of annual gross revenues. And what we've seen is those that are scaled, what are the factors that could contribute for them meeting that threshold of that top 3%? Well, we've seen the obvious: access to capital, access to networks, and technology enablement. So with the scale companies with which we're so familiar, pre-pandemic, they were thinking of how can we enable technology in our sectors. We've seen some revelations and improvements in terms of being architects of our own solutions in agri-tech, for example. And that relates to our communities. We're working the fields, we're working, the farms. That's Latinos and Latinas. And so that is a holistic point of view of leveraging technology. I agree with Cecilia about health services. We have a number of our graduates of the scaling program working on several aspects of telehealth, but we also have some trailblazers, a Latina specifically, Elizabeth Alegria out of Austin, Texas, skilled Latina entrepreneur, owns 5 mental health clinics. So she's looking at more app-based scenarios to serve our constituencies. She was thinking about that pre-pandemic. Think about what it is today in terms of the demand, with especially serving the underserved communities. And what I would say as well is the evolution, that ambition to go global and to have access to other markets with e-commerce. So I saw some momentum there that has been intensified, not only from the scale companies that we know, but the unscaled that have been, thinking about this. They know it's a vulnerability and opportunity because the data supports it. Our Latinx community and entrepreneurs are the most aggressive when it comes to global commerce.
Fascinating. And then lastly, Ruben, would love to get your perspective on what you were seeing before our sheltering in place.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Mark just said. I think fintech and e-commerce are massive opportunities, particularly because a lot of the people, the communities we come from, are underbanked, right? And they've never really had the ability to digitize their businesses or even have companies that can really speak to the problems that we have as a community. But also, you know, a lot of people in our communities are natural born hustlers. And I think how we think about scaling that at a higher level and really inspire all these entrepreneurs, you know, to be able to expand the bounds of what they think their business can become and the customers that they can service. And it's really never been easier. You know, I personally, the inspiration behind Castro for me was a tianguis that would, you know, happen outside of my door every Saturday. And this idea that you have these entrepreneurs that just build these tents and start a business, I think that shows kind of where the future of commerce happens. And it happens in a lot of those, you know, communities where we come from. A lot of us are the ones that are working and hustling and making those products move. So there's a massive opportunity there to inspire that next generation of brown entrepreneurs to spearhead those markets.
So let's kind of double click on that. With the this new normal or pandemic, right? Am I clear to say that you think that there is almost like a business in a box or a tech stack that is needed to digitize kind of like the taco business or the papuseria, or is it more than that?
I think it's a little bit of both, you know, and I think the pandemic really just accelerated, you know, where we're already going. And really, I like to say that it's crunched it down from, you know, 5 years to 3 months, where, you know, tech is no longer a nice to have, it's an existential piece of your business.
Exactly.
And, you know, something particularly that I'm very passionate about was like really seeing what the new kids in the block were doing. And there's this little term that I coined that I call DM commerce. There's this growing amount of business people that are starting businesses on things like Venmo and Instagram, right? Like it's like the new normal. And it almost seemed to me that they're kind of trying to makeshift these imperfect solutions because they're a lot more accessible. They're free to use. They're instantaneous, right? And you just want to get rolling because you don't know if the concept you have is truly viable, and you need to fail and pivot several times before you really commit to something more robust and more expensive. So I think the tech stack, I think, just needs to be refined a little bit, but it's really about, you know, helping entrepreneurs make it easier and easier for them to be able to monetize the attention that they already have on the marketplaces where people already exist, aka TikTok, aka Instagram, aka Facebook. And I think if we make it very, very easy and accessible for more and more entrepreneurs that are just getting started to have a very simple tech stack that just gets to the point of what they need to do, just sell and fulfill orders. You know, it works for a taco spot, but it works for, you know, an established restaurant, but it also works for grocery stores, for really any type of business. You know, this is about digitizing commerce as we know it. It's transvertical in a lot of ways. But I think that you know, the friction to market right now for the smaller people is very, very, you know, it's a very high barrier to entry. So I think, you know, entrepreneurs of tomorrow need to start thinking of like, how do we remove that barrier, that friction, to empower as many people as possible to start selling digitally as quickly as possible. And I think those tools then refine themselves into a better distribution stack for people to be able to say, hey, this is just how we do it now. This is the new way of commerce.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. I want to move over to Sergio and talk about the post-pandemic investment thesis he has around global learning, and maybe if there are some particular companies that have emerged during this time. Yeah,
sure. So I think of the pandemic as like Ruben said. I see it as accelerating a lot of the trends that we already had, and it also has shifted some of the trends. So I'll give you a few examples of what I would call startups I wish existed so I could fund them, kind of thing. So
great, so, that's what we want to know. We have people who want to create companies and hopefully want to fund them.
Yeah, so there's a few. I'll give you specific examples. They're not only in education, that also span into the workplace. because I do think the theme of empowering people to do a better job or get a better job or make more money in their job is spans beyond just educating. It's about creating a workplace environment that is very productive to being to doing the best you can. And so I think if I go towards that theme, obviously there's a few that I'll mention. So one thing that I've been thinking about is as we have realized with the pandemic, there's no need to go to an office, 5 days a week for 8 hours a day anymore. So what I've been thinking about is what snaps back to what it used to be, which is essentially that, versus doing a lot of things from your home office and essentially going to an office when it's absolutely needed. So in my vision of the world, there's an opportunity for you to maybe go to an office once a week or maybe twice a week if you're an office worker, but do most of your work in your home. So that's going to bring up a lot of really interesting startup opportunities. One that there's a few core things that you'll have to have. Obviously, incredible bandwidth, incredible platforms that allow you to communicate beyond what Zoom can provide. Two is, I think if you're going to be isolated for three days a week or 4 days a week, there's going to have to be a lot more better analytics to give your coworkers a sense of beyond Slack and beyond Box and beyond Dropbox. You're going to need a real analytical set of tools to give your employer or your coworkers a sense of how you're doing, how productive you're being, track each other's sort of collaboration, also track each other's moods. So I think coaching networks will be very important, because the farther you are apart, there's no you're going to have to recreate that. You will have to go to an office and build relationships, but you also can do a lot from your home. You don't have to jump on planes, but that's going to require a lot more analytics so that you could actually keep track of collaboration, mood, productivity, and things like that. So I see a whole world of analytics becoming much more important. That's one example. The other right around learning, which I think Ruben touched on, is this notion that as the world of the working world shapes, becomes no longer a 9-to-5 job, you could actually do many different types of jobs. I can envision workers having a DoorDash job, Uber job, Uber Eats job. There's a multitude of things, including an eBay selling job, or maybe they do, you have 4 or 5 different jobs, which used to be, I guess, called the gig economy. In that world, you're going to have many different tools that track for. You're no longer a 1099 worker, but you're also not a W-2 worker. So there has to be a creation of a new class of worker that creates a whole host of opportunities around training, around financial empowerment, around saving, investing, around using your money to retrain yourself. So there's going to be a lot of fintech opportunities that I would want to fund in this merge. If you're an office worker, you may be remote most of the time, or at least half the time. If you're more of a gig economy type worker, you're going to have a whole host of tools. So I think those are kind of two things. Obviously, there's a lot that will happen in education, including the reinvention of the university. And so I think that there's a lot of tools and platforms that can be created there as well. But I'll stop there. I think there's probably 4 or 5 other startups that I would love to see. But let me save those for later.
So everybody who's watching us, you heard it first. Sergio has a whole list of theses and themes that he's thinking about. So if you're an engineer and you're technical, or you want to form a team, maybe these are ideas you should strongly consider working on. I'd love to get your perspective, Cecilia, on how you've seen the evolution of, I think Mark even touched on this around mental health. I'm sure, particularly like I know in my own being inside, having family members being impacted by COVID, mental health and mindset has been something I've been thinking about a lot, but I am sure telemedicine or other things that you've been seeing kind of come out of this. Would love to get your perspective.
Yeah, the healthcare industry, I think, has just kind of been thrown into having to adopt technology at a pace that the industry hadn't seen before. And so that was really interesting to just see the organizations we already work with go through that sort of transition of having to adopt telehealth. And a lot of what had prevented them from doing that before the pandemic were actually, regulations around billing and the way that they were reimbursed for providing services. And so there were a lot of, kind of restrictions into how healthcare providers could bill for telehealth services that are now available to them. So that's been interesting to see that shift in our healthcare sector adopting technology in that way. It has surfaced a myriad of other types of problems when it comes to the digital divide for low-income communities across the US and telehealth. We think right away about the video conferencing, but if you think of Navajo communities in rural areas where there's no access to Wi-Fi, how do you keep in touch with a patient in that way? Even in more urban settings where somebody might not have a smartphone, there's still a big percentage of low-income people across the U.S. that don't actually have a smartphone. So how do you enable those patients to also stay connected to their providers? And that's a piece that we've an area that we've filled using text messaging, which is a somewhat simple technology, but overcomes a variety of barriers when it comes to people that might not have access to a smartphone or Wi-Fi, and in the traditional sense that they still cannot access telehealth in the way that other or patients might be. But in the cases where that is available, it's presented a lot of opportunities that I think were even challenges before. A lot of the things that we would hear and see before the pandemic was maybe patients that would be no-shows for their appointment because maybe their employer didn't let them out for 3 hours to make that drive to the clinic and attend their appointment. Now they can essentially step out, take a video call or a phone call with their provider and actually have access to healthcare in a way that they're not, having to be physically located at the clinic. And so I'm hoping that a lot of these things that have been put in place from a regulation perspective that have allowed our clinics to now provide, phone call consultations or video consultations. We're just crossing our fingers that they don't go away, because it's opened up a lot of access to patients that previously had to physically be at the clinic location for that provider to be able to bill for those services. And so there's also just a broader, I'd say, adoption of and things where our clinics are getting very creative with what they're able to do within the limitations that they have. And so some of the things that we've seen and that we had been hoping for a long time was for the healthcare sector, and especially when it comes to underserved communities, to think more holistically about a patient's needs. And so thinking about mental health, thinking about social determinants of health as well. The fact that a patient maybe with diabetes might have, complications, and it might not just be because they don't understand their condition, but it might be because they don't actually have food in their fridge, or they have a lot of other issues that they're dealing with, depression or anxiety, that are actually impacting their chronic condition as well. And so using technology as a way to help both identify, there's a piece of just identifying that a patient has a need, and then there's the treatment piece that comes afterwards. And I think there's a breadth of opportunities in both of those areas to help our healthcare system essentially just run more efficiently in terms of being able to identify the populations and the patients that need help and need it immediately. Right now, when we talk to our customers about social determinants of health, what it looked like before the pandemic was maybe they give you a survey, a paper survey. They'd screen you in the clinic when you came to the clinic once every 6 months. But maybe you needed food in your fridge 2 weeks ago. You know, maybe you needed to pay that rent last month and now you're homeless because there was no way to connect you to those services. And so there's a lot of power in technology and a lot of ways that at least our clinics have gotten really creative with using texting to just ask that question or send information like, hey, we're distributing food boxes at this location Saturday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Come on by and pick up food. And so those have been, at least for me, as stressful as the pandemic has been with the growth we've seen, that creativity that the clinic staff have put forward to help their patients overcome, you know, a number of those challenges. And then, you know, that becomes a way to help prevent, you know, somebody falling into a very deep depression or dealing with anxiety and a number of other issues. If we're able to help them just meet their daily needs, is essential, I think, at this point.
I think the theme that's coming across to me is digital divide. What we've already seen in terms of who has and who has not in this country has been exacerbated, and it's really kind of put a mirror on how we're actually also thinking about building responsible businesses from, you know, the investment standpoint, and also for entrepreneurs who are building companies. I want to move us over to fundraising. Obviously, in this environment, as an investor myself, as soon as shelter in place was, and there were people that were going into process to raise rounds of financing, a lot shifted for folks. I'd be curious, just maybe by a show of hands, who actually had to go out to market or close a round during the pandemic? Okay, great. So why don't we talk about that experience, Ruben, and then we'll follow it up with Cecilia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fundraising in the middle of a pandemic was quite the experience. I mean, I was bootstrapping for a while. Right before the pandemic hit, we kind of had this benefit to us, I guess. March hit, and we kind of hit this exponential curve, and then everything just kind of changed. And you know, I'm based in Chicago, but the majority of all my funding did not come from Chicago. It just kind of spread, you know, kind of like the virus itself, just all over the place. And I was just talking to investors. Yeah. And the round came together very, very quick, very fast. You know, we went from like nothing to term sheets in a week. And then the round was closed and oversubscribed in like 3 weeks, and everything was like done in a flash. I still haven't really even caught up with what happened. That was literally, you know, we closed around late July. So, you know, it's weird not having met any of my investors in person. I still only met 2 out of like 7. It's all been just on Zoom. I don't think that has really like changed much. You know, like I feel like I still have a pretty good connection with them. It's just the fact that we've never met them in person. So that's been kind of interesting. You know, this whole transaction for a lot of money happening with somebody you've never been with in the same room has been interesting. But I think it goes to show that you know, when you have a pretty good product and a pretty set vision that just kind of creates a benefit, you know, you kind of have this ability. And I think even for founders of color, this kind of opened up a lot of doors. You know, our lead investor is Harlem Capital in New York. And one of the reasons why I was really aligned with their mission was, you know, the fact that only 1% of all VC goes to, you know, Black and Latino founders. And that's a gigantic problem. And a lot of that time is because you just don't have the networks, or you don't know those people that can put you in touch with them. But I feel like in this pandemic world, it's a little easier to be able to put your message in front of a lot more people that you would have otherwise not been able to. At least that was my experience, because, you know, I'm a first-time founder. This is my first fundraise. I didn't really quite have deep networks like that. I don't come from an Ivy League university. I'm a college dropout. I was undocumented all of my life, you know, so there's been some net benefit, I think, that just allows you to be able to reach a lot more people, and people being a lot more willing to meet with a lot more other people that they would have otherwise not, come in contact with. So I think there is some benefits to what happened. You just have to know how to embrace it. But it's a weird experience, but here we are.
And remind us, how much did you raise?
Our seed round was 2.7 million.
Okay, so everyone listen, you can raise during a pandemic. And what I really appreciate about you is the mindset. Like, you're coming from a growth mindset as you're going into that. And I think I will say, having been a former school teacher, sometimes in serving kids of color for the most part, sometimes in our communities, we can be in scarcity mindset. And I think I really, really want to push that if in entrepreneurship, in investment, how important it is to have that mindset and to be able to see opportunities even when there are massive, massive challenges. And one other follow-up question to that, Ruben, were you already in the fundraising process, or you started right at the pandemic?
Well, Cash Up was a very spur of the moment thing that I built last August. My previous startup failed, and I was like, I don't even know how I'm going to pay rent. What am I going to do? And I think that's where I just quadrupled on this hunch about the future of commerce. Like, how are people starting these businesses? And this was before the pandemic. And I think it just kind of got accelerated because of the pandemic and all these people having to, and I tried to fundraise before the pandemic happened, and nobody would give me the light of day. I built and bootstrapped this from scratch with a $10,000 investment that one of my friends gave me. And, we just kind of started hustling. I just went back to those roots and I said, okay, if nobody's going to give me money, I don't need it. I'm just going to bootstrap. And, we launched this. It kind of took off. My little sister became my account executive. We got to this point where, we're pushing $300,000 a month in sales, and it's literally just me and my little sister with a $10,000 investment, and everything just kind of switched. So I think you just kind of have that mindset, like you said, just of, what is the value that I'm driving? Just quadruple that and making an impact in your customer base. And I think everything just kind of follows from there, but kind of putting yourself into this position of power where, your product can really help you kind of put that next brick in front of you where you become as self-sufficient as possible. And I think that gives you the leverage you need to, and people just kind of start asking from there. And it moves really fast after you.
That's incredible. Listen, for the startup that I wanted to, in my past career that I wanted to start, I also wanted to pull my little brother in, but he said no. So
it wasn't part of the plan, by the way. I never foresaw for this to happen. It's just kind of how it unfolded.
I don't know. You're helping me manifest that when I start the next thing, that he will be part of this plan. Cecilia, you also went through this fundraising process. So can you share just a little bit, some quick tidbits of advice that you want to share to our audience here who are entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and I'll mention that our legal structure is a bit different because we are structured as a nonprofit. And so there's no financial return to our investors. They're looking for impact. They're looking for what benefit are we driving for society and for patients. And so, 2020, we had actually started the year in a tough position. We'd been kind of on this path to try and get the company to sustainability. Last year, a lot of revenue misses, a lot of those things. And so the beginning of the year before the pandemic hit, we actually scaled down the team a bit in terms of size. We were already sort of preparing for a different 2020. And then when the pandemic hit, it was, we kind of had this moment where we were like, all right, what are we going to do? And what is the right thing for what we set out to do as an organization? And so, I'd almost say we were kind of like, if we're going to go out, we're going to go out with a bang. And so we just made the product free. And we just said, hey, you're any kind of healthcare organization that's serving underserved patients that needs to get information out, you can sign up and get the product for free. And we got over 100 new organizations that we started to work with. And a lot of those have now converted to paying customers. And that was not what we set out to do at the beginning, but it's been, I think, Ruben, you were kind of talking about this. It's sort of been a really weird position to be in, to be seeing the business thrive, seeing our revenue increase, seeing our customer acquisition costs decrease, seeing us now we're much, much closer to sustainability as an organization. And so I think that story of for the people we went to ask for money, being like, hey, you know, our plan right now is we're just going to give it for free. Are you in or are you out? You know, just helping us do what we think is right for the community that we want to serve. That was the first piece. It was, let's get information out. The second sort of layer of that was around equity. And as soon as we started to see the disproportionate rates at which Black and Latinx and Native American communities were getting infected and dying from this, there was a second round of sort of people we went to say, we want to go deeper into these communities and go out and just find the organizations that we know, the tribal health centers, the organizations that serve predominantly, you know, Black and African American communities. We want to get them on the product as soon as possible so that we can help them, you know, tackle this pandemic. And so that was sort of that was the story for the new people we brought on board. And now, you know, things have shifted a bit. And now we're kind of preparing for what's going to come next when it comes to the vaccine and distribution and communication and education. And so, you know, the strategy sort of shifted a little bit, but it's been really exciting to see, you know, our funders that have really stepped up and said, yes, like, you know, I'm going to fund this so you can scale and spend this money on Google Cloud and spend it on, you know, your messaging infrastructure and spend it on these other things so that you can continue to make the product accessible. And then, you know, on the other side, our clinics have seen the value for the product and have ended up converting a large number of them to paying customers, which was not expected, but a very welcome byproduct of what's happened.
Yeah, something that I saw in some of the investments that I made, obviously, especially in education, people just had to give things for free, but also the relationships that you built with your customers was much more kind of all hands on deck to be sure that they would be retained and didn't necessarily churn. But that to me was a big insight. I want to move over to Mark and Sergio because Mark, you're an ecosystem builder. Sergio, you're an investor. I'd love to get a sense, Sergio, from you first. What type of coaching and what type of guidance did you give your companies or investments, either angel or through Norwest during this pandemic for fundraising?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because as things were hitting in February, I was you know, I think a lot of us saw some of the memos that came out of some venture capital firms where we were kind of caught deer in a headlight. We didn't know what was going to happen. So the first instinct was to kind of crunch down and lower the cost of burn of our companies, but very quickly we realized that there were different types of companies that were benefiting and some that were not benefiting. So we got more surgical about what to advise our companies. There's you know, as much like what you've seen in the Netflix have benefited, there are a lot of different companies in hospitality and restaurants, gyms, salons that have not benefited from this. And so I think there in the private markets, there's the same dynamic. Unfortunately, there's the have and the have not companies based on where they sit and what they offer. So we have to be very surgical about what to advise them. I think if you're in a mode where you're benefiting from this in pandemic, unfortunately, you should continue to innovate and invest towards the business. Be very careful. We are advising companies to be very careful to not overspend if you don't believe that the business is going to kind of sustain growth beyond the pandemics. So we're currently in the process of sort of reshifting our focus to try to understand what 2021 will look like for a lot of our companies which benefited from 2020, the 2020 COVID bump, let's say, if those are beneficiaries. Because 2021, we're trying to understand how much is going to get pulled back to the old normal, and how much how much of a new normal have we created depending on what they offer. And so we're going through those exercises right now very carefully. It's a financial exercise, but it also has to do with product, with marketing, with essentially with sales. How much do you spend on sales ahead of sales expectations? So it's very hard to forecast, but that's what we're advising the companies to continuously be very agile and be very be nimble, remain nimble, because we don't know what the flip back of this is going to be. In the case of companies that are not doing well and have not benefited from COVID, we're advising them to just keep their burn low, because if things do snap back, I mean, they'll be beneficiaries. There'll be a lot more opportunities for them. So you shouldn't hibernate, but you should be in a very low burn mode until things the world comes back to a more normal state.
Got it. Thank you for that. And then Mark, as an ecosystem builder, and the programming that you've built around, what guidance, or were a lot of founders reaching out to you for guidance?
Absolutely. One thing definitely centered around the navigation through the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. Mm-hmm. So understanding that you all who are joining us, some of you may be founders or aspiration to be founders. Some of you are businesses, because I've been to the conferences. So I've gotten the honor to know all of you who are in the different spectrum. So I think this next part could relate to all of you in terms of what happened with PPP. And that's access to capital, even though, let's be real, it's not a loss of revenue loan. But I'll give you a resounding stat, because it comes out of the research coming from Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. It's the most comprehensive about how COVID has affected our businesses. It's called the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on Latino-owned businesses. The ongoing impact of COVID-19 on Latino-owned businesses. There's a lot in it to unpack out of that report, but it's only a few pages. I hope that you all have a chance to download that, because it's very urgent. It's a critical representation of how we're doing. But related to PPP, Latinos got accepted as at half the rates of whites, and we're talking only employer-owned firms. But I'll tell you something, when we took a deep dive into the scale firms, we made a comparison between white scale firms over $1 million of annual gross revenues, Latinx scale firms over $1 million of annual gross revenues who had not gone through our program, and scaled Latinx companies who had graduated from our programs. Okay, so the securitization of PPP financing was 28% for white-owned businesses that are scaled employer firms. That was 18% for Latinx scaled firms that had not gone through our program. And it was 82%, 82% wow. For scaled Latinx that had gone through our program. All that means is if you have access to capital and you have access to networks, it will benefit you through a crisis in a pandemic. So we have an alumni portal. I was feeding the alumni breaking news from top sources that I have, either at the Treasury, SBA, the National Banking System, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, et cetera. They were really relying on the information coming from here because it was credible, it was real time, it was that portal's open, that portal's not open. This update that's 36 pages doesn't really mean anything from the update from yesterday. And so that really made a difference. As well, when you saw that clog with some of the national banking partners within our ecosystem of companies talking to companies. So Latino and Latina business owners, please join these groups and talk to each other, because people were saying, you know what, I had that same problem. But I went with PayPal and they approved me in 24 hours. Guess what? Boom, 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 boom. We had 6 approvals with PayPal. I got in touch with my contact at PayPal and we were rolling with that. And then we unlocked the X factor in so many cases, the unlocking of CDFIs and minority depository institutions, MDIs. And so the same thing, we empowered 20 companies within 48 hours to get their approvals. And that's what led to that 82%. What I would say is, since we're talking about innovation, it's an opportunity to meet your capital providers before you need the money. And that means that you could do that virtually. and to tell your story. To tell your story is so important. It's not only what you know, it's who you know and what they know about you right now. And certainly you could do that socially in a compelling way. The reason I'm mentioning that is because we've had a breakthrough as well. We have aligned ourselves with a sponsor who is called Small Business Exchange, SMBX, whereby they enable a crowdsourcing component through the customers of the company. And so we had a customer during an alumni company during the pandemic go to this SMBX, rally their customer base because they had a big social following, and they are doing $1 million raise. And so I just hope that's an inspiration to all to drive innovation even during this time. Empower your accounting, empower your legal, and empower your capital connections. I think if you could do those three things, you're positioned, because what's going to happen next is there's an election cycle. There's a COVID, a resurgence spike. There's the flu. And, you know, you can get the flu and COVID. It's not one and the same. Oh, I got the flu and COVID. No, you can get the flu, you could get COVID, and you can have all these factors, including what happens with the election and where's that next round of PPP financing, either for those who secured the first time around and are looking for a second round, or those who, maybe I'm talking to the choir here, those of you who thought, you know what, white flag is too confusing. I don't want to go through that. And then you're saying now, well, maybe that would have allowed me to keep my employees on for a little bit longer. Well, you're going to have that opportunity, but it's us working together to be architects of our own solutions, to drive policy. Like I did just before this call, I said, Congress, the people that I was talking to, you got to get it together, because our Latino businesses are at stake. And you know why that's important? It's because we have the largest rate of growth in the last 10 years, positive 34% in terms of business formations. Everybody else, 1%. So if we're getting accepted at half the rate as whites and we're growing this much, that's a gap. And it does not only affect us, it affects the whole American economy. That's plain and simple. We're creating jobs for Latinos and non-Latinx. And so anyhow, I hope that bridges the gap between the founders that are listening to us, the emerging founders, the aspirational founders, and then the Latino and Latina entrepreneurs who are doing this as well.
Great. You always inspire me, Mark. So thank you. Thank you for your wonderful words of wisdom. Now we are almost at time. So I just wanted to close us out for kind of parting thoughts. And it's interesting that you mentioned this issue around advocacy and policy, right? If there is a moment in time, this is racial and social justice are conversations we didn't have in the office, and we're having them now. We have an election coming up. If there's a time to get active, it is now. And I know, Sergio, you also have been very active around policy around board work that we've been on committees on. But I want to close out with parting thoughts. If there's one or two things that you want to say to the audience, because we have thousands of people on who are watching you now. So Sergio, I would like to kick that off with you, and then we'll go down the line and then wrap up.
Yeah, what I would say is I would say that this time is probably the best time to start a business and to fund a business. So that to the entrepreneurs out there, if you look at, this is not me just promoting entrepreneurship. It's proven that in the Great Recession of 2009, 2010, the best companies were created those 2 years of the Great Recession. And before that, in the dot-com bust of 2001, some of the best companies were created back then in 01 and 02. Pair that nicely with the fact that great generations are created under duress. So if we've all heard about the great, generation of World War II, or the great regeneration created by the Great Depression of the 1929-30. So as a student of history, I love the fact that the COVID generation has gone through this duress and is going to be coming off this tough time as very resilient, growth mindset focused. And on top of that, we've proven in the past that times like these are the best times to start companies. So I would encourage everybody that wants to start a business, especially in some of these big pockets that are being created of opportunity because of this. Some of those that I mentioned, I would encourage everybody to think long and hard about it, because where there's a will, there's a way, and there's definitely a lot of funding out there for the right entrepreneur with the right idea and the right energy.
Great. And now we'll go to Cecilia. Parting thoughts.
Yeah, I think, a few of the themes that have been discussed earlier, Sergio, you were just mentioning these as well. It's just the hustle, the resilience. It's a tough time in the world, but I do think that as a community, we find a way to make ways with whatever is happening. I see it on, Facebook groups, people selling pan dulce, selling whatever it is, and you find a way to make it work. You find a way to figure it out. And I think for me, as a first generation college student, as a, someone that grew up low income, when I became a founder, I mean, as a founder, you usually don't pay yourself very much for a few years, but I was already used to that. And so it wasn't that big of a challenge to start a company, because I was already used to doing a lot with less. And so I think it is a tough time for the world, but I think in a lot of ways presents a lot of opportunities that I do think that as a Latinx community, we can thrive on that scarcity and that innovation and ride the wave as much as we can.
Got it. And then Ruben, and then we'll close out with Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I'm particularly passionate about. I meet so many young, brown and black kids that just have no hope because they feel like nobody looks like them at the level that they think they could ever achieve. And I think, it's about having this mindset that don't let anything stop you. Like when I started my career, it was undocumented. I couldn't go to school even though I had scholarships to go. And my girlfriend went to school, so I would borrow her ID. And I taught myself how to code in the hallways of the university I couldn't afford to go to because of one piece of paper that wasn't my decision. And I think it's never been easier to start a business, right? All of human recorded knowledge is at the palm of your hands. And it's about that mindset. It's like, what do you want to leave behind for the next generation? What are we going to do to better ourselves, to push our people forward? And it's never been easier. It just takes guts. It takes doing it. It takes not being afraid of failing and just trying. And I think it's something that we're already optimized to be at the people, from our community. So just take the risk and don't look back. Just keep going forward. Keep moving.
I love the fact that you used your girlfriend's ID. That was very creative. I don't know if I used that ID to get into school. I was using for other things. That's another story. My mom is listening. Mark, we'll close out with you, my friend.
Oh, wow. Those are great suggestions. Thank you, Sergio and Ruben and Cecilia. Wow. I mean, I was jotting down some notes up here. What I would say first is we have a mantra in our ecosystem. We don't have crab syndrome around here. It's real simple. Do business with each other and get business for each other. You know what? If you take a look at how you're investing from 2020, and what that says is that between 2017 and 2018, guess what? US Latinos had the fastest growing GDP in the world, So we have consumption potential. Use it wisely. I've had to diversify my vendors when it comes to everything that I do, whether it's cutting my hair, whether I'm shopping for a new shirt. Guess what? More than likely, there's a Latino or Latina entrepreneur that's doing it. And so that's every little bit helps. The other thing I would say is I would end with 3 points in accordance to this resilience that everybody talked about is number one, make sure that you build relationships with capital providers before you need the money. Number two, make sure and educate yourself. During this pandemic, there's opportunity in crisis. There's sessions all over the board at any time at night, any time in the morning, and take a look at your inventory of where you can accentuate your strengths and problem areas that you need to solve. And I guarantee you, for business owners, there's something there for you. And then third, it's about telling your story. It's not what you know and who you know, but what they know about you right now. I'll end with a powerful statement. One of our entrepreneurs Progeny Coffee, Maria Palacios, please look her up. She called me at the outbreak of the pandemic. She said, I lost 90% of my revenue in one day. What am I gonna do? Well, all she did was transform her business from B2B to B2C using another Latina entrepreneur in terms of IT support. And now she's being covered on Forbes. She's going to be on Good Morning America, talk about crossover appeal in early October. And that has led her to expand her vision. And now she's seeking round of financing. And with all that storytelling, she's going to get it. I'm so honored to be with everybody, and keep hope alive. And just recall that we are an economic power, and let's lift each other up. And let's move not only our community, but this country forward. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. This was an incredible panel. I love the energy and the fact that everyone shared their authentic lived journeys with that. So let's start companies. Opportunities are present in crisis. And échale ganas, mi gente. All right, thank you again. You take care. Bye-bye.